The night the storm began wasn't marked by gunfire or political speeches, but by a single poisoned sip. In the marble halls of the Royal Summit Hall in Bazimba, the capital of the West African Republic of Nabala, golden glasses clinked in a toast to unity. But beneath the silk suits and military medals, betrayal stirred. President Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary figure who had risen from the ranks to lead Nabala, collapsed moments after raising his glass. The crowd froze, some in horror, others in fear, and a few in something far more dangerous: anticipation. The event had been meant to showcase a new era of diplomacy. Instead, it became the opening scene in a coup laced with silence. Medical teams rushed to the scene. Traoré's body convulsed, lips trembling, eyes fluttering. But just before he lost consciousness, he whispered one word to his closest guard: "Watch." Within minutes, the summit hall transformed into a prison. No one was allowed to leave. Phones were seized, documents collected. The attendees, military generals, business tycoons, foreign envoys, were now suspects in a crime that could reshape a nation. Outside, the people of Nabala knew nothing. Their leader had fallen, and the palace remained silent. But inside those walls, a storm had begun to rise. Old alliances would fracture, shadows would be dragged into the light, and a plan far larger than anyone had imagined would be revealed. Because the poison was never meant to just kill a man. It was meant to erase a revolution, and now the game begins. Let's uncover the truth together. Ibrahim Traoré's condition remained a mystery to the public. The official statement released by the Nabalan Council of Security called it a sudden medical emergency. But behind the guarded gates of the fortress of Nivo, Nabala's presidential compound, the truth was spreading like wildfire. The president had been poisoned. Only a handful of people had access to Traoré's inner circle. Yet someone had slipped a toxin into his wine during a supposedly secure state banquet. The implications were terrifying. It wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was an inside job. General Kama Diallo, head of the National Guard, called an emergency session with top advisors. As he looked around the table at hardened officers, veteran bureaucrats, and the president's closest confidants, he saw nothing but silence. Not even the most trusted dared to speak. They all knew what it meant. Someone at that very table might be the traitor. Outside the capital, rumors buzzed through the streets of Lakara, a dense industrial city loyal to Traoré's vision. Some whispered that the president had already died. Others said he had been flown abroad. But no one knew for sure. And then came the fracture. A leaked voice message from an anonymous source claimed that the vice chairman of the Economic Council, Matis Kudia, had begun making moves to assume control. A quiet power shift was underway, slow, unofficial, but unmistakable. Traoré's vision of an independent, self-reliant Nabala was now in jeopardy. But in a quiet wing of the military hospital, sealed off from the public, Traoré's chest rose and fell. He was alive, but barely. A team of doctors, handpicked by his chief medical officer, monitored him by the second. And in the hallway outside his door stood a figure cloaked in silence, recently summoned from exile. Commander Jono Malik, a former intelligence officer cast out for insubordination. Now he had been brought back for one reason only: to find the traitor before the country lost its soul. Commander Jono Malik had always operated in the gray, the quiet corridors where power whispered and secrets bled. Years ago, he had been dismissed for defying a direct order from a former regime. But Traoré had once called him too honest to be controlled, too clever to be discarded. Now in the president's darkest hour, Malik was back. The first thing he did was shut off all communication inside the fortress of Nivo. No calls, no emails, no signals in or out. The only people with access to Traoré were under Malik's watch, and no one outside that circle knew the president was still alive. Then he began his hunt. Interrogations started with the waitstaff. A young server, clearly terrified, confessed that he had seen a new face in the kitchen. A man with no name badge, no known assignment, who had handled the wine before the toast. The man disappeared immediately after the poisoning. Malik ordered a silent scan through the palace's surveillance. Most cameras had been wiped clean between 7 p.m. and 7:15 p.m., the precise window when the wine was delivered. It was a surgical erasure done by someone with high-level access. That narrowed it down to 5 individuals. Among them, Olivier Marin, Traoré's own head of communications, a tech expert and a longtime loyalist, or so everyone believed. But Malik found an anomaly. Marin's security badge had been scanned twice that evening, once in the control room and again in a hallway no one was supposed to enter. When confronted, Marin didn't deny it. He simply said, "I thought I was protecting him." That was enough to detain him. But as Malik dug deeper, the pattern changed. This wasn't a single betrayal. It was an orchestrated effort. Supply logs showed an unauthorized spice shipment had arrived that morning, including rare additives from outside Nabala. Malik traced the package to a logistics company registered under a shell name, Goro Ventures. And Goro Ventures had links to offshore accounts and foreign investors with a long history of meddling in West African politics. "This isn't about wine," Malik muttered under his breath. "It's about control." The poisoning of Traoré was no spontaneous betrayal. It was a prelude to something much bigger. The trail from Goro Ventures led to a name that had quietly hovered beneath the surface of Nabalan politics for years: Lamar Savin, the Minister of Trade and Resource Development. Suave, multilingual, and fiercely diplomatic, Lamar had cultivated a reputation as a bridge between Nabala and international investors. But now that bridge reeked of rot. Commander Jano Malik didn't move on suspicions alone. He waited until his team decrypted a series of private correspondences on Lamar's encrypted server. Emails referencing contingency plans, time transition, and most damning of all, a coded message just 2 hours before the banquet, marked simply with the phrase, "The bottle will be delivered tonight." When confronted in his polished marble office overlooking the River Llano, Lamar didn't deny the message. He only smiled faintly. "You think I did this for myself?" he asked. "This country is choking under the weight of an idealist." He leaned forward. "You know the world we live in, Malik. If we don't cooperate with global interests, we'll be left behind, or worse." "I didn't try to kill him. I tried to preserve the state." Malik stared at him in silence. "You fed the nation to wolves," he said coldly. Lamar was detained, but not before offering a final name. Kyle Sulin, a corporate liaison and foreign advisor who had only recently returned to Nabala. Sulin was the link to Goro Ventures, the one who arranged the import deals, signed the logistics contracts, and conveniently disappeared 2 days after Traoré's collapse. It was now clear this wasn't just internal treason. It was external orchestration, a coup without tanks, a regime change by proxy. Traoré's vision of independence, of Nabala owning its own mines, managing its own resources, defying global monopolies, was a threat. And that threat had been marked for removal not by force, but by poison in paperwork. But Malik wasn't finished. Using Lamar's tablet, his tech team traced Sulin's last known contact, a high-level foreign agent named Dorian Trask, known for disguising covert influence as economic diplomacy. And Dorian Trask was on his way to Nabala, scheduled to arrive as a negotiator within the week. The game wasn't over. It was just entering its most dangerous phase. The jet touched down just after midnight. No flags, no press, no entourage. Just Dorian Trask stepping onto the tarmac of Nabala International, dressed in a plain Navy suit, briefcase in hand, his diplomatic clearance pre-approved by the Office of Foreign Relations. Officially, he was here for economic dialogue. Unofficially, he was the architect of a silent invasion. For years, Trask had worked in the shadows of multinational mining conglomerates and covert financial operations. His power wasn't loud, it was legal. He didn't overthrow governments with weapons, but with contracts and conditions. And with Ibrahim Traoré believed to be dead or dying, Nabala was ripe for acquisition. What Trask didn't know was that Traoré had survived. The president, though still weak, was conscious, and now watching from the hidden chambers of Fortress Nevo. His inner circle remained unaware, save for Commander Malik, his doctor, and one hand-picked general. Every movement of Trask, every handshake and whispered conversation was being recorded. Traoré's directive was simple. Let him walk into his own trap. Trask began with charm. Meetings with transitional cabinet members, proposals for immediate aid, infrastructure grants, energy partnerships. His recovery package would bring in billions. All he needed was a few signatures and the silence of resistance. One of those signatures came from Lamar Savan's temporary replacement, a technocrat named Myra Chenu, who had no idea her office was under surveillance. But Malik did, and the more Trask pushed, the clearer the plot became. He wasn't just here to finalize influence. He was here to ensure Traoré never returned. A secret agreement was uncovered, a clause that would allow Trask's clients to install security consultants across key Nabalan institutions. In reality, they would become embedded agents of control, all under the guise of peacekeeping and economic stability. That was the final straw. Malik activated Protocol Alarian, a national defense contingency reserved for invisible threats. Trask's movements were tracked, his calls intercepted, his hotel suite bugged, and a plan was set. Trask would be invited to a private signing ceremony where he believed the last obstacle had fallen. Instead, he would come face to face with the man they had tried to bury, alive, alert, and ready. With Dorian Trask in Nabala, tensions in the capital coiled tighter by the hour. On the surface, everything seemed calm. Trask hosted luncheons with ministers, signed MOUs, and appeared on national media speaking of shared prosperity. But Commander Malik had eyes everywhere now. What he saw behind the mask was preparation for a silent coup. Documents found in Lamar Savan's decrypted files revealed the full plan. Once Traoré was confirmed dead, a temporary economic stabilization committee would be formed, headed by ministers with ties to Trask's financial backers. Foreign advisors, armed with vague security mandates, would be positioned at key ports, mining zones, and energy hubs. In short, Nabala's sovereignty would be quietly dismantled without a single shot fired. But Traoré was not dead. He had regained enough strength to speak and strategize. Hidden from the world, he reviewed the files, consulted with Malik, and, most importantly, prepared to strike back in a way no one expected, by revealing himself at the peak of Trask's illusion of control. A trap was designed. An official handover ceremony was announced under the guise of finalizing a development treaty with Trask's group. Media was invited. Ministers were summoned. Cameras were discreetly installed. Every second would be recorded. Every word broadcast live. But Malik needed a final piece, someone inside Trask's own team. He found it in Rosa Varen, Trask's personal aide, half Nabalan, raised abroad, who had grown increasingly disturbed by what she'd seen behind closed doors. When Malik approached her with evidence, she didn't hesitate. "I signed up to help rebuild this country," she said, "not to sell it." With her help, Malik planted audio bugs in Trask's briefcase, intercepted his encrypted calls, and prepared a full dossier for global release. The moment was coming. Everything Trask had built, the facade, the documents, the fake allies, would crumble in one single orchestrated reveal. But the risk was immense. If even one part of the plan failed, Traoré's enemies would strike harder, this time openly. There would be no second chance. And so, as the day of the signing ceremony approached, a single question hung in the air. Could truth, so carefully buried, still rise in time to save a nation? The chamber was quiet. Dimly lit by a chandelier made from Nabalan crystal, the ceremonial hall inside the fortress of Nevo had been hastily transformed. Where once dignitaries posed for cameras, now stood a single oak table, a flag draped behind it, and 2 velvet chairs. Dorian Trask entered the room with practiced calm. Behind him, Myra Chenu clutched a portfolio of agreements that, on paper, would open Nabala to massive foreign investment. Trask believed the final act of his silent conquest was about to unfold. After this, Nabala would no longer be led by revolution, but by regulation, his regulation. He straightened his tie, his lips curling into a small smile as he reached for a pen. "You might want to read the fine print," a voice echoed from behind the curtain. Trask turned and froze. Emerging slowly, supported by a cane, was Ibrahim Traoré, gaunt, eyes hollowed from days spent recovering, but very much alive. Behind him stood Commander Malik and a detachment of elite guards. "My apologies," Traoré said dryly. "I hear I was dead." Trask's composure cracked. "This is highly irregular. You tried to poison a head of state," Malik cut in. "You erased surveillance, manipulated ministers, imported a network of foreign operatives, and you thought no one would notice." Trask dropped the pen, but Traoré didn't raise his voice. He moved to the table and sat down. "You see, Dorian, there are two kinds of power, the kind you inherit and the kind you earn." He gestured to Myra, who stood frozen beside Trask. "You were misled. This man does not offer partnership, he offers chains." Malik stepped forward and handed Trask a folder, evidence of financial transfers, decrypted emails, shipping logs, and statements from arrested officials. Every thread Trask had carefully spun was now being unraveled. But the trap wasn't just legal, it was public. Hidden cameras streamed the event live across state television. For the first time in days, the people of Nambala saw their president, alive, standing, and speaking. "Let this be clear," Traoré said to the camera. "Nambala is not for sale." The response was electric. Across the streets of Lakara, Delvo, and Sembra, people poured into plazas cheering. The silence of uncertainty shattered. Trask was placed under diplomatic house arrest. An investigation into foreign interference was opened, with international observers invited to participate. The regime that had tried to silence Nambala from within now found itself exposed to the world. But the battle wasn't only about one man. It was about the soul of a nation. Weeks passed. Stability returned, though scars remained. Lamar Savan faced charges of treason. Olivier Morin, once a loyal aide, turned state witness. And Mira Chanou, ashamed of her unknowing part in the plot, resigned and publicly endorsed Traoré's leadership. Commander Malik returned to the shadows, declining any promotion. When asked why he refused the spotlight, he simply said, "Some of us are meant to work where the light can't reach." As for Ibrahim Traoré, he didn't celebrate, he rebuilt. His recovery was slow, but his resolve was unshaken. In a speech marking the 100th day since the poisoning, he addressed the people. "Power is not a throne, it is a promise, and promises must be defended, even in silence." He spoke not of vengeance, but of vigilance. He restructured intelligence agencies, reduced dependency on foreign aid, and passed transparency laws. His leadership had nearly been stolen, not by armies, but by ambition and influence. From the episode, a lesson emerged, one that echoed far beyond Nambala. The enemies of progress do not always wear uniforms. They often wear suits. The real threat to any nation lies not just in bombs or bullets, but in subtle deals, in unchecked power, in those who smile as they sign away sovereignty. And so the story of the poisoned glass did not end with tragedy, but with revelation. The poison had not killed the man. It had revealed the truth.